Hello, I'm Mara Purl, and this is Novel Conversations. Today, I have the great joy of speaking with my wonderful friend, Cheryl Hunter. Cheryl, I'm so pleased to have you here. Thank you very, very much for spending some time with me.
It is a delight and
Uh,
an honor. Thank you.
Cheryl is a best-selling author. She is a speaker. She's a media personality. She shares her message worldwide on all kinds of media outlets. In your current iteration as this amazing person who's so well known and gets your own message out and helps so many other people with their messaging, but it didn't start out that way. You had a very devastating experience as a very young person, and then, from what I understand, you didn't stay in that victim place for more than about a minute and you just figured your path forward. But I wonder if you could tell us that story.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do that, Mara. It's interesting that I feel privileged to be able to share the story now, although for many years, more than a decade, I never uttered a peep about it. I grew up on a horse ranch in the very remote Rockies of Colorado. It was so remote from our little mountain ranch that other than when I would lie on my back in the horse meadows and look at the sky and watch occasional planes flying overhead, there were no signs of modern day civilization. And I would lie there among the horses and the cows, just lying on the ground in the meadow as they'd graze near me. And I'd look up and think to myself, I want to be the girl in the plane, looking down at the girl lying here in the meadow. But in order to be the one and be going places like that, I would have to have something to give people. I'd have to be able to contribute something to them. And right now, I'd said to myself back then, I all I know how to do is ride horses, and I'm not the best at that. So I'm going to have to find a way to offer something of value to the world before I can be the girl on the plane. So I would daydream about that. And although it was heaven growing up there, so remote, by the time I got to be a teenager, it felt stifling. I felt as though I wanted to get out and see the world. And I really wanted to find a way to live in the big city. It felt like it was truly calling my name, like I was built for more than just this horse ranch, where all I saw were my brother and sister and a lot of cows and horses. And I just daydreamed of how on earth I could get out of there. And one day I played hooky, hopped on my mini bike, rode to the nearest town with a store, got a Glamour magazine for life and career advice. That's what you do as a teenager.
Yes.
And where else does one find such inspiration? And I thought to myself, oh, I'm going to find something wonderful here. And you know how life turns out the way that we kind of say it's going to go. And sure enough, in those pages, I found what I was going to do, how I would escape Rye, Colorado. I was going to become a model. They said right there in Glamour magazine, they were always looking for them. I was on the boys' basketball team. I was tall enough. I thought, this is my ticket. There's no modeling done anywhere near here. I'm going to have to find the place where they need models. I guess Europe. That's where fashion comes from. So I made a plan with my best friend. We worked several jobs. The big day came. We left with overpacked suitcases, and I was like determined more than ever that somehow, some way, I was going to find a way to stay wherever, any big city and make it my home.
Wow.
So there we are. We arrive in France,
And now you're the girl in the plane,
and I'm the
flying
girl in
over.
the plane. You're so right. I had nothing to offer people yet, just an overpacked suitcase and a dream. And I am there in France, and a man with a big fancy camera around his neck walked up, literally this fast, and said, "Hey, are you a model? I can make you one." And I thought, if that doesn't beat all, I mean,
Perfect.
that's how easy it is to become a model over here. And he said, "Just come with me and my friend over there," and pointed to this big guy standing on the wall. And my friend said, "Over my dead body." But you see, she wanted to go back home afterward. She was perfectly content. There was no way I was going to go back home afterward. So I thought, this is probably not the smartest idea, but hey, I can drive a tractor and wrestle a steer. I'm a smart, savvy person. I'll figure it out. My smarts and savvy were no match for these criminals. They had nothing to do with modeling. They drugged me, took me to an abandoned construction site, tortured, beat me, raped me. You can fill in all the gory details with your own mind, but I had never experienced anything like that. I was so completely lost. What do you do? I had no idea. The best I could come up with, Mara, was to beg God for forgiveness. Please let me go. I promise I'll be a good girl.
Oh,
I'll be nice to my brother and sister. I'll let my sister wear my clothes. I'll not talk back to my mom and dad. I'll hold my grandma's hand at the mall. She was always trying to hold my hand in public, and I was mortified. And I thought, as I was lying there on the cement, that I had somehow deserved this. I was being punished for being such a bad girl, for being such a smart mouth to my mom and dad. And I would say, "God, if you let me go, I'll be so happy. I'll be such a good girl." And for whatever reason, they decided to let me go. The guy with the camera comes to me and says, just out of the blue, seemingly, one day, uh, grab your stuff. We're getting out of here.
mercy.
And he chopped all my hair off first. It's just so incredibly sadistic. I don't know why. I don't know why ever that any of it happened. I mean, talking to law enforcement since, oh, it was trafficking, it was a handoff gone awry, it was they were they were criminals who did this for a living, but why they let me go when I'd seen their faces, I have no idea. I just had no idea other than to run for my life. They dumped me out on this patch of grass, and as the car drove away, the best coping skill I could come up with at the time was to pretend I was dead, literally to play dead. They knew I wasn't dead, but my coping skills were so underutilized. That was the best I could come up with. Play dead until they drove away and I got up and ran for my life. And it's in that moment, I thought, I've made this impossible promise to God. Happy. I'm going to be happy.
Ugh.
I'm going to be happy. And I realized, God, if I thought I was bad then, now I'm really a bad person. I'm not talking about how I feel now, for Pete's sakes, but
No, I
in the
understand.
mind of a child, I was a teenager. I mean, in effect, not even in effect, that's a child. Your brain, the frontal cortices aren't even completed in development for years to come. And I then realized that I've made this impossible promise to God. I can't be happy. Happy. I was no longer physically captive, but I was more captive now than ever. I had suddenly this massive captivity between my ears. All I could think about was how ruined and damaged and filthy and stupid I was. And the best coping mechanism that I could come up with then was I was going to pretend it didn't happen. Never tell anyone, pretend to myself that it didn't happen, just go on life as usual, as though none of this had occurred because I didn't know what else to do. I
You know, the
showed,
incredible strength of a child to summon those survival skills. So you did what you had to do in that moment, which was which was spiritually wise in a way, and that saved you. And then other doors opened later. But I understand what you're saying. There was then a chapter of a sort of invisibility, silence, suppression, which must have started to affect uh, your thinking in general. So you had sort of two people. You had the front facing person who's normal, and you had this interior person who's spinning and trying to find herself.
wow, Mara, that is dead on, so astute. I decided there's no way on earth I am going back to rot away on that horse ranch. I became a model anyway
Mm-hmm.
and was blessed to live all over the world, meet wonderful people. It was a great job. And I was always in a new city, in a new country, and a new, I was very cosmopolitan on the outside, very lonely and isolating on the inside, which was good because I never had to actually talk to people. And fortunately, the people I worked with every day were from different countries. We all didn't speak the same language. And I found a new best friend in that era. It was reading.
Mm-hmm.
It was a perfect way to avoid appearing completely antisocial. I thought if people came anywhere near me, they'd be able to smell it on me. The
Oh,
filth and disgustingness and gullibility and idiotic decision making.
as
And
though you had ever done anything wrong.
it's such a, it, when we're victimized, particularly as a child, we feel culpable.
Mm-hmm.
We feel that we brought it on ourselves. Like I'd said, as I'm bargaining with God, thinking, well, I've obviously merited this. I've brought this upon myself. So it must be because I'm a worse person than I thought I was for all of those horrible sins, like not letting my little sister wear my clothes,
You had to make up a list of things that you must have done wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
Forgetting to feed the horses one night. All of the sins of my previous life.
So, with this incredible story that you're having to process and process, I love the defiance of becoming a successful model anyway. It's such a big nanner. uh, and it's sort of glorious revenge, chapter one. And so then I know there's much more to really share about this. Um, I wanted to sort of skip ahead and share briefly with you. I ended up in the world of working in domestic violence for a period of time. I learned a great deal. I was absolutely startled to be in what I thought was a permanent relationship. And uh, an argument escalated. I was pushed up against the wall with an arm across my throat, and I got very compliant and soft so as to be able to slip away. Left the house with my keys, went to a friend's house, and never came back. I spoke to him and I said, I can only meet you in the office of either a counselor or a lawyer. I can't be alone with you because this happened. He said it was all in my mind and wasn't willing to, to do the work on it. So there followed an intense period for me too, even though at this point I wasn't a child. I was, in my 30s. And I thought, what the hell is wrong with me? How could I not have recognized? How could I have been so wrong about this person I trusted and so forth? So interestingly, my dear friend had a similar scenario going on, and we wound up going to Haven House, the oldest shelter for battered women in Los Angeles, one of the oldest in the country, and said, how can we help? And we were actresses and had a platform where we could invite people to speeches. We wrote about 50 speeches. So inspired, met so many wonderful people, and started to recognize behaviors large and small, triggers and warning signs that we never had recognized before. So just this crimes against women and how they tend to create this darkness and silence and an inward turning of blame, all these things that you're talking about. It's just fantastic to have learned something more about it. Uh, at one point, so much of this was surfacing that it seemed life was getting worse and worse. And I thought, no, this is a signal that it's getting better because it's rising to the surface, not hiding anymore. And I think this kind of behavior is now much more difficult to conceal. So I'm grateful for that. I served at one point on the board of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence in Denver. And I asked the director, who's this wonderful, wise woman, said, how come a relationship can seem to go along harmoniously for 20 years and suddenly erupt into violence? And she said, the control will be as strong as it needs to be. So little things like, I really don't want your hair to be long. I want it cut off. I really don't want you to have that friendship. I really don't want you to work. These kinds of controlling mechanisms. And the more usual case is that it's men who are trying to control women, but it's not always that way. It's a problem that's not exactly gender based. It's based on lack of control and lack of empathy, lack of understanding, things that have happened in the perpetrator's life earlier. So we came to a point of realizing if you want to heal this, you have to work on both sides of this equation. So there's just wonderful learning and healing to be done, as terrifying and horrific as it is in the throes of it. So what would you say are some of the things that you understand now or you recognize now that just, you understand right away what you're looking at?
One of the things I did as I started to recover from the impact of the kidnapping was speak to other people who had gone through adversity. And I volunteered for a decade in elder care facilities. There were Holocaust survivors,
Mm.
victims of, other victims of genocide, war vets, domestic violence survivors, all of it. As you could imagine, it's a very broad cross section of people unified solely by age. And I both places where people were wards of the state as well as privately funded. And there were many different types of facilities. But I went there because of that captivity of the mind that I was feeling, where my own internal dialogue was incessantly about how a negative talk rather about how bad I was, and then interspersed with thoughts of revenge against these men in France. But I wanted to hear something else, and so I spent a lot of time with these people. And as I listened to what they shared, people who had been brutalized, who had been victimized themselves in some way, that theme of culpability internalized, that was a very common theme, and it was really eye-opening for me. I thought it was that I inherently was to blame. And then when I started to see thematically how that showed up for people, it was eye-opening. But then there was also, I felt that if it was as truly, if it were as awful a situation, the mind can downplay it. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe
Oh, yes.
if it were as bad as I thought it was, I would have told someone by now. But then I started hearing people say, I've never told this to anyone, but, and that was the secondary thing. So that victims were saying that they thought they were personally to blame, that they've never told this to anyone. And then I could hear that, wait, those two themes were being used against these people, that they felt that internally it was their fault. They were somehow culpable or to blame. And that, that silence, that was, both of those combined are the weapon of choice for abusers.
Yes,
And
exactly.
it was staggering to realize this, that that sort of biological imperative, as it were, to remain silent and therefore avoid more of this pain, is actually being weaponized against us unwittingly. It was
Fascinating.
revolutionary to hear that, and then to continue to see it in others. Mm. Those are two of the patterns that I saw. I'm curious. I'm sure you have similar ones, but very different ones as well. What have you seen that was eye-opening?
What I mentioned about compliance
Oh,
inappropriately, sometimes startlingly, like I would think that I had connected with this beautifully expressive woman friend, and then she would say something like, well, he doesn't really want me to continue this friendship or to have that job. And those where I might have dismissed them earlier, now I recognize them and could at least open a conversation for her, to look at that. I didn't want to be in a position of putting someone in harm's way, but just to have some awareness. And then the training that we got from Haven House had to do with some pretty basic logistics, like creating a go bag, um,
mm,
you know, and having a plan for your money, for your safety, for your children, and so forth, that nobody wants to face. Uh, but it's important. And there is great training available. So uh, at the end of this video, maybe we will put some resources. Uh, and I thank you, Cheryl, for talking about this. I know that it's never easy to share this story, but it's important, and I admire your courage in learning to speak about it and really overcoming and just sailing on with this, extraordinary life, and some other things that we'll get to talk about in a moment.
Mara, the thing that I have found is that life hands us whatever it hands us. And at first, when I was teenager, I thought, well, hell, this isn't what I wanted. Who ordered this? It's like, I don't want this. But I look back to those years where I would just lie on my on my back on the ground in the horse meadow and look up and say, I want something to give people. And then suddenly I had this way to contribute through the story of what occurred to me and how I'd overcome and
It
what
was a
I'd
beautiful
found with
starting
other
point.
people. Say
Yes,
that again.
it was a beautiful starting point for a lot of important work.
Truly. And it's sure, in the beginning it was hard to tell the story, but over time, every time I share now, I feel more connected to who I am, more connected to God, the universe, because that's what I was given. And I could have said no as I first did. Heck no, this isn't what I wanted. But in the moment I said yes to it, it started to bestow gifts on me I could have never imagined. I now have some way to give people something that matters. I now can contribute. And it's
Yes.
all from saying yes to
Oh,
what
you're so
life
right.
gives
You're
me.
so right. That opening your thought to prayer, to reaching out to touch a, an aspect of the universe that was quite invisible from where you were. But that sense of wisdom, faith, the sense of possibility, that's what you reached for. And the universe is continuing to answer abundantly. I thank you so much, Cheryl.
It's my honor. Thank you.